So my plan is like this. We have this thing. In general, we have this thing called Shabbos, Me'adim, holy times. That's how the steht in Pusik. Was? Yeah, it says that it's working. But you want to hear it? You don't hear it. It just records. It only records. Yeah, in general, we have this thing known as Me'adim, right? We could think about it in a lot of different levels of things. That's really what I have to try to get, right? In some kind of systemization, they would all be part of the same thing, but it's not clear. We have one thing we have is Shabbos, Meinzach. There's all the other Me'adims. Me'adim from the Reis, Me'adim from the Rabbunan, Me'adim from Megillas Tanis, Me'adim from Minig, the Rebbe's Chesleinis Yutzat, all kind of levels of different times, Shchodesh, and so on. Yeah. The Nanutzach, every as I thought. Now, I think there's a very solid question. Now, in general, so let's start with the thing. We'll hope for the best. The Kitzur is, what was I saying? So, right, no. Okay, so now let's talk about the Me'adim. Now, even in the Midraise, or at least Midrabunan, we'll see if it's because the Rashuna is only halfway as Midraise, so it's a shtickle problem. But even in there's generally two levels, two kinds of Yom Tovim, right? In other words, interestingly, and this we're going to get to interestingly, Al Pip Shat, in other words, in the Rishonim world, people that before there was Mekabulim and Zohar was didn't really wonder about Pesach or Sekes or Shvius. What wasn't the not Favos because it's Mitzrayim, because whatever the reason Tam should be, but they didn't wonder about the theological implications of it. How could it be that one day is holy and the other day is not holy? Because they didn't see it's not mefirish, at least they can of course Mekoris, but it doesn't seem to say in the Torah you should do Pesach because Pesach God is closer to you. Because Pesach we maybe we go closer to God, we go to the Beis Hamikdash, Lil Regel, maybe Berachnis, because there's Yitzias Mitzrayim, because there's whatever Matan Torah, whatever we're celebrating in that. It doesn't seem to even arise the question of so God is closer in some days, or God is curious about which day it is. Different things like that doesn't really arise in general Me'adim. It does arise already in the Rishonim. Very few, I always try to find, but very few, but at least 2 or 3. And it's pretty clear that the Rambam was worried about this, and all this Chassidim, and then the people against the Rambam seem to explicitly be worried about this, which is Aseres Teshuva. And basically because of this Gemara Rosh Hashanah that says, right? This is the Gemara. Karibia is, is this? Right, it's also in Yevomes. Dirshi Hashem Beimatzai, Beyachad Aimes, Omer Rabbi Barvia, Ali Asir Yom Mishbain, the Shulim Ekpirim, that's a shtickle Gemara in Sechzer Shun Dafit Ches Med Aleph. And if you look, they don't seem to say anything. Kalpunim, if you look on the Gemara, everyone seems to understand this for some reason. Kind of not worried. How could it be too much? We'll find someone that says something that I didn't find. Kitzur Hamasa. People are saying things. He's answering, calling me. If there's anything very interesting on the Gemara, but Kitzur. But it's not only this shtickle Gemara. Obviously, the whole idea of Rosh Hashanah being Yemei and Aseres Machiv is only some sort of continuation of that. This is a very explicit shtickle Gemara that says Beim Outside Aseres Machiv. It seems to be the most explicit shtickle Chazal or Gemara that like literally says God is closer to you, or your tefillis will work, whatever the sugya is really about. And therefore, this was something that actually bothered people. But if you actually think more broadly, I do think that it's the same question for is Shabbos in any real way? This is heilig, this is all kind of Eisrutzens. These are all things that don't literally. It's actually much later. If you look in the Rishonim, they don't seem to be very worried about these kind. At least again, in this world that we're thinking of. So let's try to get to it. I just want to put down this is the subject. This is the subject that I want to explore. That's all I'm doing now. Just I don't know how people generally understand it. What's the normal understanding? What do people think?
No, I mean, it's the whole thing. This is the whole concept of kodesh and chol altogether. I mean, what does it mean something kodesh? I mean, so it doesn't mean it's not so much about God. I mean, it's not like.
What is it about?
It's not like God changed. I mean, how do you understand kodesh? I mean, okay, what does it mean?
Okay.
So it's not like kodesh. So.
No.
The cotton. I mean, whatever. Hektish, whatever. And he had an issue with it, right?
What issue?
Extreme, labor. He was.
Yeah, but it's not. It's a hype nicht the problem. The problem is the problem.
That weren't so,
I think that most people. Two things. Okay, in some way, but that you see, I think I'll be shot. For most people, call it's not exactly the same question, like you say, because to say that tefillin is heilig, what does heilig mean? I don't think it has to, like you say, it doesn't have to mean anything to do with God. Okay, does that mean that there's it's like a sgilla, that it's like a God is in it in some way more than another place?
Right,
God cares about what? How do you define that? I don't think for most people it doesn't really mean that. It means we could say it in a menschliche way. This is a thing that we use for the Avodas Hashem, so we have to be mechabed it in a second order way.
Right. So we could say thing about Zman HaKodesh also.
About Shabbos, you could say something like that. Shabbos is a day that we rest and we do a mitzvah, so we have
designated for Avodas Hashem.
Yeah.
But the Rambam says in Parshas Bo, the take that we can tzam. These are things that mich the Avodas Hashem.
Okay.
Like being returned also.
Right, but for Rosh Hashanah it's going to be harder to do that. Let's stay with that.
Because you're madin, you're saying there's something about God.
Because it literally says being matzah.
Right,
for example.
Yeah.
A little harder. That's true. It's true. I think that not as although of course if you ask some more kibbaldige person, for example, he will tell you definitely. You'll see the Kizri says this openly. He'll say that what do you mean Shabbos? There's Olam Atzilis, and the week there's Olam Avriya, and the Chvais Yom Tov is Olam. Everything has there is something real in all of that. So that's yeah. Said that. So that's definitely my eyes on how it works. I think that most people. I do think that it's literally an analogous question to Kedushes Mukam. That I do think. Can treffen chalikim, maybe there is a chalik, I don't know. But I think that speaking about holy places is literally the same question. And of course, people like people like Levitch really think that they're getting out of that question by ignoring it. Or bichlal, nicht nur aim. If you say it's really it gets other connotations, but I think it's a similar question. Maybe not literally the same question, but similar. In other words, is it true that God is closer in the Beis Hamikdash, in Eretz Yisrael, in Kivrei Tzadikim, ich weiß was, and something like that? How do people understand that? This does get us into things that people discuss more openly. What's Ashros Ashchana? Does that mean? Is that something mitzadoi, mitzadaini? Okay, so Bekitzer, so I basically in as far as I know, there's at least so that's really the question. I don't know what the exact the Olam thinks. I think the Olam generally would say something like what does Olam say? No. What does that mean? God doesn't listen to you a whole year? How do you understand this thing with Gemara? In other words, if you say there's the levels, there's some kind of avoid. You have better kavuna, then somehow God cares more. Okay, or whatever. Your mind's best, it is best achieved. Yes, okay, that's all. That's definitely not what it's talking about. Beside, then it's gefährlich. So we could put it into some kind of category of scharvoin or some kind of relationship. And we say, okay, but if we daven with the same kavuna and the Aseres Machiva, it works better than in Gimel Taivas, then how do you understand? How does a normal Yid understand that? He doesn't.
What's the problem?
Just not to forget. Maybe there's no problem. I just want to know how he understands it. No.
You make it. Kabbalah is cool. Kabbalah is cool. Kabbalah is cool. Yes. Here's the time. Now's the time. I don't know.
No, but is that really true? Forget about favos. Is that really true? In other words, is it really true that God's office has hours?
That's what he said.
That's what it says where?
The Kabbalah.
Yes, again. What do people think? Well, so what do you think? That's what people think. I don't think people really think that, because everyone knows that God listens all the time and So what is this? So this is what I want to get to. What's this? No, by the Gemara, let's leave the Gemara aside, because the Gemara you could always say, but I don't think people believe that literally. Nobody that I know. They're all gonna say, no, of course the Eibush listens always, but more. So what does this more mean? I think that's the very fuzzy thing. I think that most normal Yidden, including maybe everyone, have like I've had the Hebrew and I've had the Heiliger. So you say contradictory things that there's not really a logical way to make work together. Maybe there is, but I think there's some very fuzzy. I mean, in the same way as they have the same. This is madraigas, you know. There's a code word called madraigas. It's madraigas. I want to know what it means. So tell me how this madraiga called. If there's madraiga, let's learn that.
I have a friend of mine. Like it's different word. It's just different terminology. Like the usual world, it's called gross. In the Rapshitz world, it's madraigas.
No, I don't mean Rapshitz madraigas. I mean.
Gross. It's the same thing. There's a certain missing. A person is like more. Behemoth comes in Chidam that is can shots. But the shots is not only shots, it's gross.
Yeah, but there's different. I mean, what I mean by
different type of person. That person knows shots is a different kind of person. It's not the same person.
Yeah, right. Okay, no, but what I mean by madragas is more like the idea that there's different. Yeah, but it's not the same level. Somehow.
You think madragas like
levels? Yeah, not madragas in the Rapshitz term. Madragas. Yeah, that's another thing. Maybe it's connected somehow. No, what I mean is like you say. We get into the same question, which is sort of the same question. God does everything, yeah, but does he care about Yidden more? Does he do for Yidden for Tzaddikim more? Yeah. So how does both things work together? It's andere madraiga. It's different. Do you have betuchen? Do you think God? Do you have a minute? Yeah, but it's madraiga. Like it's also an excuse for a lot of wishy-washy, unclear thinking, So, in other words, like, for example, this also gets into the same kind of question, right? Or maybe it's a good thing. Maybe fuzziness is good, but so you have betochen, so it doesn't matter if you work. Yeah, but I'm not on that madrega. What does that even mean? Either it's not like this or it's not like that. So either you believe like this or you don't believe like this. So you believe like this, but not really. What does it even mean to believe, but not really? Believing is a very simple thing. Either sometimes you think that maybe God does man, sometimes you think, nah, okay. So don't believe like that. Specific, yeah. What else could it mean? Was this madraigas?
No, there's different levels of there are different levels in I guess consciousness.
Okay, so it's not about what you believe, it's about
the person believes is gonna die.
Okay, so that's right, but that's not. So that's subjective. That's not about what you believe. It's about what you remember, right? We keep on going to this difference.
That's what most.
But then why would that make a difference?
Of course, I believe that.
But why would that make a difference?
It's not part of my everyday life.
But why would that make a difference? I don't remember how laws of mechanics work. My car still works on it every day. It doesn't need me. Things that are real don't need you to remember them, right? It's always what we keep on saying. Why would you have to have some logic or some mechanism why that makes a difference? You could say, oh, God only, like the Rambam said, God only is mashgiach on the people that are remembering. Then you already don't have literal, then you don't believe in it already, right? Because then you're saying there's a mechanism that works through that.
It's like it's a vicious cycle,
okay.
Yeah.
Or the same. But kids, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, it's like how they start having the betuchen, because I know the now by betuchen, so I know the connection with Gans is Gans. like if I go with that Rambam, so
No.
let's say I know my Betuch Shvach, so I know the Ashkoche is Shvach, so I got to work. Right?
Exactly.
So I have to, so it's hard to get out of.
How do you get out of it? No, you don't have to lie to yourself. If you'll know that you do, the Betuchen is work. Right? What's the problem? But I think it's the same thing in these all these levels. They say, now, Father God is everywhere, but he's more in the Beis HaMikdash. So can you explain what that even means? So he's not really everywhere. So again, you could do like what you're saying. You say it's subjective. He's everywhere, but we don't notice him everywhere. And next we notice him. So then basically you're saying the Beis HaMikdash or Beis HaShuna is not really, right? In other words, it's not objectively, it's not separate from what you think anymore. It's just that, in other words, we could make this Mikdash wherever we want. That's another way of saying it, right? If we would have, maybe it's not possible because there's a long history and everything, so it's too late. But if we could have gone somewhere else and take a different day and make it a Shuna, we'll talk about it. I was like him toast from that line of thought, but people would say, but then you're just in Shtikla Pekoiris, then you say that it's just all made up. So you go back to saying there's a real difference, but then there's real difference, then he's not really everywhere in the same way. So that's still a problem. All I'm trying to get at is that there's a real problem in the simple way. Maybe it's not a problem. In other words, people, like you say, then there's a shtickle problem in this thing. Okay, so I want to do something like this. So let's start with the Rambam like we always do, and then we'll see what else we can do. Okay, so now there's a few Rambams. Which one do we start with? And then I really want to read the Chassidim of the Rambam that actually talk about this more explicitly, but just so we should have the thing in front of us. So wie sagt der Rambam? Der ist der Weiß, das ja? Kannst du außen weinig. Okay. Right. So, and then we're going to have to do Rambam and Teshuva and Rambam in a few places in Chaylik Gimel. You could find it yourself already if you have a few versions of that. So.
He almost...
I don't know if that's on the other places. Now the Rambam does discuss it first in his in Chaylik so Kohen Mikol, let's just learn this. Kohen Mikol in Hilchas Teshuva. So Hilchas Teshuva is just our Akdumet Hilchas Teshuva, which is another whole sheet I wrote in my list of shirim. But in Hilchas Teshuva is a very weird halachas that the Rambam invented because there's no Masechtas Teshuva and there's no Mishnahs Teshuva and anything like that. Let me do Hilchas Teshuva koidem, okay? And then we'll get to that because maybe we'll try to understand it. Chabok Hilchas Teshuva somewhere, another copy somewhere for you. But Hilchas Teshuva generally another time. Yeah. Ketzer Hamas and Hilchas Teshuva, the Rambam does a very creative thing where he's meshalev halachas psikas was pshat Gemura with his idea, which is totally different than what the Gemura would ever think of. And this sigi is a shtickle good example. To understand how he structures everything and to see what's going on about this. In other words, the Rambam, let's be very clear, the Rambam has an idea of Teshuva, and we could maybe figure out some other time what exactly it is, but to him it really means tikna nefesh. In other words, it really means literally becoming better. You don't need no God or not, maybe it has to do with, it literally means whatever. In other words, ethics basically boils down to Hilchas Teshuva. But it's of course the surface detail that even if you're bad, then everyone starts off bad, so Hilchas Teshuva is really for everyone becoming better. That's the Rambam really what Teshuva is, as far as I can understand. Now, of course, this is very problematic for the old-fashioned idea of Teshuva, which is all about getting God to forgive you, which is every touch of Teshuva. So and that, of course, Al Pi Pshat, it's much easier to understand, right? And you have Chaliki Kabura, for example, is the first sig which the Rambam gets stuck with, which the Rambam would, of course, doesn't literally say this. The median people after the Rambam say this openly, that the Rambam would understand. Maybe in Perish Mashnayis is Maramis to it. But so the Rambam, another thing we have to know about the Rambam, Akdama Kludus, that's what I'm saying, is that what the Rambam does in all these sigis, and not only in Hilchas Teshuva, but in every other sigis that he does, he just he just does both of these contradictory things, and he doesn't say how he reconciles them. So he's gonna, because that's his job, he's Mishnah Torah, he has to summarize everything that it says in the Talmud, so he's gonna summarize Masechtas Yemei, the whole sigi of Chalik Kapur, and just write it down, and he's gonna have his way of understanding it, but nothing different than any other sigi that he reads in his way. But not, in other words, in his way, lamdish, nicht philosophisch. Besides, in his Chalmul Zan Weg von Lernen, sag. Besides, however the Rif taught it, more or less, however the Rif and the Rimikash taught, that's how he summarizes them. And then the next halacha is going to write something that radically changes everything. And he's not even going to say how these two things match. And he does the same thing even in Modern Vaychen, where he sometimes elaborates more on the radical part, on the whole other way of understanding things. He never go back and explain the Modern Chazal. And Modern Vaychen he says, because he doesn't really care. Zolzan, the Chazal Pshat, whatever it is. That's his basic strategy. But then you ask him, but you know that you're yourself using it, so how do you explain it? And he just doesn't, he just ignores this question, for the most part. And therefore, this is also the reason why people are very confused about what the Rambam is actually doing in general. But then, for the most part, his Talmidim, no, some of it, there's two ways to go with this, right? Just to have a summary, there's two ways you can go with this. You could be like the Modern Vaychim seems to want you to be, which is, we're going to think through these concepts for themselves, whatever, as Aristotle and Aseres taught us. Tshuva means kach v'kach, and hayotz mizeh kach v'kach. So stimmt da Mama Chazal es geht, dann nicht soll der Mama Chazal eins geben. And shine. And that's one, that seems to be really, in other words, that's a really important thought, because Karab's Leben, also jeder Zitutim, also steht, it says in the Chazal, doesn't say, if you understand the concept, the Chazals are just whatever they are, they're not important. That's one radical way, and that's, generally the people that understand this, or that go in this way, really also ignore Chazal and general tradition, and some of them say very radical things, some of them, but that's one way of doing things. Then there's another way of doing things, which is, you could call it like Rambamist, metunim, how do you say in English? Moderate Rambamists, right? The moderate Rambamists are generally also the ones that are Talmidei Chacham, because if you're not Talmidei Chacham, if you're just a philosopher, then you don't care what it's name. But people like the Meiri, for example, is in some way a very moderate Rambamist, because it's the Chlei and Tchiyah Gemara Tosfos. So you can't just ignore every shtickle. Well, he writes a summary on the whole Shas, so it's very hard for him to. The Rambam didn't have that problem. He just summarized the parts that were interesting to him. But the Meiri, his job is to write everything, so he has to do that. And some other people, even that, but the Rabinel, in some way, he explicitly argues with a lot of things that the Rambam says. So it's different. He already understands that the Rambam is not the Chazal, and therefore sometimes he's going to choose to go with Chazal, like Rav Kreskas. People, there's a whole tradition. There's a later tradition of Islam. Earlier, there's basically everyone agrees. People didn't so much get this early. The earlier generations of like what we call moderate Rambams, they don't understand the Rambam in the radical way. You see, the Ravnel already has in his mind. Okay, but maybe I'm not being accurate. He already has all that so-called apikotis, but. Because but he already has all of the, because Rebbe Ibn Tibbon basically understood it like this, so it's not like he already has, but he already sees like some sort of like, yeah, you become basically a Reform Jew.
No, I'm talking about the type of the ones that hold the Panini, you know.
That's the person that Rabnel is always most mad at. He's not aggressive. And according to some definitions, but I'm saying, yeah, it's true that he understands it in this very radical way, and therefore he's like, he sometimes he does agree with the Rambam that a lot of things we have to explain, but he's not gonna, what am I saying? He's not gonna do so much of what these other people do, which is like to explain how the Rambam understood the Gemara, because he could do it, and then he's gonna say, the Master, the Gemara doesn't mean any of this. That means something totally different. Right, and these people, they don't never do that because they really.
Right. But now it's explicit. It brings the famous thing.
Yeah.
This is a what's the name?
The Rabbanel. He does this. I don't know if the statement is Valpeh, but he does this openly in his Sfurim. You see him doing this. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, it's a shtim.
Yeah. So, but you see, the earlier people, they did understand it, and they didn't understand it for the most part in the most radical way, or at least they didn't take that radical way to its extreme, which you could take it, and maybe you should. But and therefore, sometimes you see, and there's not a lot of this. Maybe there is a lot of it, and they're not printed, they're not famous. But then, if you read those texts, you could see how they understood a lot of things. And sometimes it's debatable if the Rambam would have actually ruined so many Amud Chazal in such a way. There's a lot of examples. Anyway, this sig is another example. So if you look in the Meiri, for example, the Chlik Kapur, the Meiri says, the Rambam just means, would understand Chlik Kapur to mean that this is just levels of doing Tshiva. Probably you didn't with your nefesh, you didn't really become better. There's still a problem, and so on. It's a größer Doichik in a certain sense. It's not really what Chalik Kapur are about, but we kind of say it. And similarly, we'll see what they say about about what's it called? About this noise, about the noise of Aseres Teshuva. They're very worried about this noise. Actually, these people. But so if you look in the Rambam, so basically, I'm just gonna give you, and the Rambam talks about this. So there's really these at least two things. First, we have to talk about Yom Kippurim, how Yom Kippur is mechaper, which again, the Rambam seems to mix in with his idea of Ein Le'el Tshiva. So the Rambam in Parak Aleph, L'chas Tshiva, the whole Malach of Parak Aleph. Last year I gave a shir, I think, going through this. I have to find it. The Rambam in Parak Aleph says like this: he learns Tshiva from Vidi, so he needs to find a makar for all of his ideas in Tshiva and decide that Vidi Keli. That's how it works. It's in the Chashmis. And then he says, now he, in his Halucha Bais, it's not really Halucha Bais, but in the printed Halucha Bais, it goes to Yom Kippur. And the Rambam really wants to make Yom Kippur into a Yom Tshiva, not into a Yom Slicha. Very big, different thing. So he uses Vidi. He says, Ksona Shlach, which is Kippur L'chol Yisrael. And what do we see the Kohen Gul doing? Shenema v'zvadul v'tzkon avaynes b'ais Yisrael. So we see that really it's about getting some kind of chiv, and how could the Kohen Gadol be mizvada someone else's chatuim? The kasha, again, he's not worried about these kind of details, but he does trying to show you that there's vidi also on Yom Kippur. And then in Al Gimel he goes on to say, therefore, now that we don't have Beis Hamikdash, we still have the Ikr Chiva, Ikr Yom Kippurim, which is vidi. To him, the Ikr Yom Kippurim, even when the Kohen Gadol did the Karm was just a show, whatever it was, but it was really just about vidi and doing chiva, and therefore. And Halucha Gimel, when it says "V'atzim shel Kippurim mechapel l'shovim," shenem b'yem as heykaper, is this something contradictory? If it's mechapel l'shovim, that was kimtan atzim shel Kippurim. There's a kash, and let's see what the faket the sheet that Rambam does hold that atzim shel Kippurim is mechapel itself, but I have an explanation of that. In Halucha Gimel, it says "V'atzim shel Kippurim mechapel l'shovim." If you go through the Mahalach, you read through the Rambam, you see, at least that's what I think he says. Yeah. So and was not mechaper, and the whole Halucha is vanchas mikdash kayim. First he says Sur Mashlech was mechaper on some things without Shiva, he says openly. Even though he's a Shiva, it's only mechaper ala kalas. And it sounds like Bisman Hazeh, we're stuck with the kalas, we have to also do Shiva. That's pshat. Which is very funny. If Atshin Lekvir mechaper, why can't it do the same thing as Sur Mashlech? What's exactly the pshat? There's a technical kasha, but what I want to get to is that he seems to be saying that Kippurim is just a way of saying when you do Tshiva. And then Aloha Dalet is all the Chaliki Kapura, which we're going to ignore for now. It's not the word for now. And then Parik Bais is really where the Rambam gets, in the first halachas of Parik Bais, the Rambam's real definition of Tshiva. Aizei Tshiva Gemira. So if you notice, Parik Aleph was Hilchas Tshiva. In other words, was in the Pesach, he has to build it out from the Mekoyres, so Vidi, Chaliki Kapurim, Kapirim. That's how he builds it out from the Psikim and from the Amuri Chazal. And then in Parak Shani, he made this up, by the way. This Aizei Tshiva Gemira, nobody knows the source of it. It's about halfway on a Shtikl Gemura, but the Gemura doesn't mean anything like what the Rambam says. And this Aizei Tshiva Gemira, in other words, what he says, Aizei Tshiva Gemira means to stop sinning. This is the Rambam's basic definition. Everyone gets hung up on this. You would do love and this is the music Chiddush of the Rambam. Because in the Chimesh Tshiva is, in other words, it's Kapura, not Tshiva. It's Aizei Tshiva, bring a korban, do the correct ritual so that God should be happy with you again. And to the Rambam, no, that's maybe a psaprat and Chalik Kapura, maybe it's important for some reason, but Ikat Tshiva is to do Tshiva. Yeah, but that's what he says. They no. Imaya Tshiva. Oh, but then he said, okay, but that has to do with the Chakira. If you have to be Bule Yudo. Imaya Tshiva. This is the most rare Chiddush, these greste Chiddush in ganze Tshiva. Because nobody before him thought that was Tshiva. We're very influenced by the Rambam to think that Tshiva is Chiaz v'choyte cheta.
Well, it's not true, because in a way, when Stammes wenn wir so klein ist about Tshiva, the shot is ich will aber beide, geworden about Tshiva. Means it top gets in it,
Of course.
I mean, even the most simple definition.
Of course.
It's not the high to Tshiva, one get it, it's not.
It's not clear because that depends what you mean by about Tshiva.
About Tshiva, right?
Yeah, no, but you think yeah, but you think in the Gemara. No, wait, but think in the Gemara. Think in the Chumash, forget it. Think in the Chumash. In the Chumash, there's really only one part of Tshuva, which is Karbunas. Of course, the Rambam took the smallest thing of Karbunas and made it into the Eke. Just as Gatina Vaira, bring a korb. Maybe it only works for Shoygig, and as okay. Let's say B'Shoygig. Bring a korb. doesn't mean it's not even shaykh to the sigi of tshiva, right?
Right.
Because how can you do tshiva on a shoygik? Okay, maybe you'll make more gedurim, so that's what
Does it say Chiva over there?
that is tshiva. Ki chut ki yechtu ish. That's the parsha. Even the zvadu comes from that parsha. The noy do alef chatus yashe chutu v'hai v'yazar shomai. Das steht im Pusik. And two parshas, the parsha shlach and the parsha veikum.
But the most basic thing, the guy shouldn't the guy shouldn't arbeiten. I put it in a matzah guy who say this.
Let me give you another example.
He's
Yeah, of course.
Right? He's trying to get.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I agree, but ikar achivas, let's see, my achiva would not. That maybe that's a given. But even, for example, a very famous Mishnah that says, "No imer echte v'ush v'ayim speaking of Yud Shiva," which, according to what you would think, means literally that. Toivel v'sheres b'Yuda is not actually how Chazal think about it. The Gemara right away says echte v'ush because there's uva v'shuneba. You see, it doesn't say because you're making fake tshuva. It says because if you do it twice, then you already got too used to sinning, so you're gonna continue to do it a third time, right? So it's not saying this tshuva morgen gehst du nachmal dindigen. It would have worked if only the first time it worked. Nachmal, the first time it works. Echte v'ushav once works. In the Rambam's world, this doesn't make any sense. Again, we could reinterpret it, but in other words, let's say something like this. Even if let's say something like this, just no, not mostly. Just to illustrate, Shiva. In other words, the Hilchas Shiva. So nicht so sicher tun nicht sindigen. Auf dem darf ich kein Hilchas Shiva. Let's something on this. Then Hilchas Shiva doesn't give us any information. They said that in the erste Mal versteht Mitzvah steht am tun nicht sindigen. That's not Shiva. The noise of Shiva, what we call let's talk about Yom Kippur, right? Rather than Shiva, because it's gonna be easier. For example, I'll peep shot another illustration just to sharpen this difference. And in the Mishnah, where there's a debate if Yom Kippur is mechaper mit Shiva or un Shiva, like Stanuim, right? All of the people in this debate, and this is something that Chroinim already noticed, but it's the Lowy Rambam. Everyone is moide that Yom Kippur is mechaper, not Shiva is mechaper. Charles not, he said, "Do a Tanai in Yom Kippur." Just like there's a Tanai, you have to wear white kittel or whatever. If you don't put the dam in the right place, it's ma'akev. A Tanai in the Chalasa HaKarm or whatever, in the Chalasa HaKapur. So there's some shit that's held. There's a Tanai in the Chalasa Yom Kippurim that you have to do Shiva. But nobody says that what's really mechaper is that Shiva and Yom Kippur is just some sort of show around it, which is what the Rambam understands when he says Ma'i Shiva sheyazev chayte chete, and they literally organizes backwards. The Rambam doesn't, by the way, in Hilchas Yom Kippur doesn't say a word about doing Shiva, interestingly, or in Hilchas Rosh Hashanah. The shtickle everyone quotes by the Drosh. No, it's not Hilchas Shiva that shtickle. It's an Hilchas Shiva. It's not. You have to realize how he organized everything backwards. It's very important, and this is Sefer Hamada. That's Sefer Zmana. That's Tamalucha, how to do things. The Rambam thinks that the thought of things is organized backwards. There's something called Shiva. Now, one of the times to do Shiva is Yom Kippur. In the Mishnah, it's the other way around. There's something called Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur has Lefiyash Amrim Hatap Satim at Shiva. So he turns over the structure of things here. I want to get this, but I want to get to the point of this man. But I think this is probably the shorish of it, like Abba Shiva at least, right? And then the Rambam, if you read the Rambam Peirik Baz, you see. And then he says, okay, this is his rai that you have to actually stop to do his dav. And then Medarke Shiva. Okay, Medarke Shiva is and Misrachik and Shvan, and then he talks about Machas Pshuav and then he talks about Teres Mat Shiva.
You ever see something about Shiva? I don't know.
What?
Yeah, you see something about Shiva.
Was did was? Oh, is it Stokik wie Kolcha? Yeah, he actually does it very nicely.
I said, did you ever meet such a guy?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
No, did you ever meet such a person?
Yeah, of course.
Live, yeah?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. He says, ich will der Ramas Mas, bekili, ich bin nicht jene, ich bin ein Zweiter. Yeah. Okay. No, but to me it's very important this. So the Rambam, and this is the only place where the Rambam literally finds what Shiva is, not what Hilchas Shiva and Prutim and Sachen. There's Eizit Shiva, Mai Shiva, and then there's something called Medarkayat Shiva. There's that Sach. Multi the Rambam Medarkayat Shiva means this is not Ma'akev, this is not part of what Shiva is. These are ways to get you to do Shiva. Deirich Elat Shiva is probably really what it means. In other words, all of these things, Tzoyek, what was the point from Tzoyek? Let's go back. What's the point from Tzayek? Read what the Rambam says. Shegulis mechaperes over the end of the loch. This is mama shpirim days. Instead of saying gulis mechaperes over vavos, gulis mechaperes over, right? Because how does it work? You see them. It's shivas hamishkach. So the Rambam gulis is a makes you. If you're not at home, you feel less bagudel, so you'll be better. So the Rambam reinterprets everything into b'derech hamiste, b'derech avoid the lamas, and therefore all these dark achieva. Tzoyik tumid, right? Tzoyik tumid lefapip shat. Why is a person tzoyik? Mistam is digzig when famous tzuris because he's a virus, so he has to be tzoyik that God should be mechar him again, that he shouldn't give him anshim. And the Rambam says no. This is a way to make sure that you stay about shiva. You don't and then skip a vidi. And then in part of this dark achievas is Aseres Shiva. Halachavav is right. This is the language that you would. And Halachazayim, which talk about Yemei Kapirim itself. Ava Pishat Shiva Tzok Yifel Oilam. Then Koid Mikali says Yifel Oilam. And by the way, this is the Loy Kagemura. The Gemura doesn't say that it's Yofa. I mean, there's a shtigal stirem enough. We can there's an anshtippen in the Gemura, right? Because Betzibber, the Gemara macht a chelik from Yochanan Sibber, right? And the Rambam does quote it in the end. It's not. Then we have to understand how. Okay. Aseres this get a shal. This again, we got to the details. But this is firstly, I want to show you where it is in the Rambam. Now this is from the dark Shiva. This is nicht Hilchas Aseres Shiva. This is Hilchas Shiva. That's and Hilchas Shiva. There's Aseres Yemei Shmeinim Pshulim Pirem. He Yufa beYoser. What does that even mean? Is the best? I mean, Yadim is Kabelis. It works better. Shneim Madir Yashem Yimatzak Rivi Yitzchok. Amed V'Amin BeYuchid. Avol B'Tzibber. Kol Man She'oizen Shiva Tzyakim B'Lev Shulam. So again, you have to do Shiva. You have to Tzoyik B'Lev Shulam. And that seems to work all the time. And probably works for Yuchid all the time also. Like he says B'Ferish. Yufa Lo'olam. Yufa beYoser. So he does. This is a very unclear shtickle. Shneim Kashem L'Kayim Chol K'Yadav. And then you see, then Yemei Kapirim. You see how far it goes. Nicht nur Aseres Shiva was the Psalmedrish, Haminig, ich weiß. Even Yom Kippur mit der Reise, he's man Shiva lakol. Yom Kippur, wie Kaitz Mechila v'slich lefikach, darf man Shiva Yom Kippur, and you have to then, and by the way, this is where the only place where it says Luchas Vida Yom Kippur. It doesn't say Luchas Yom Kippur. It says here. I think there's one more. What other place that he talks about? The next place is in the next Pairik, where he talks about Kishay V'Breshuna, which we have to also understand the context. It's very weird, right? It has to do with Chetzi Zakiv. Implying is that if you go to Pairik Gimel, so this is one we call. Let me just think. It's doing Pairik Bais under the header of Medarke Achiva and Aluchavuv and Zayin. There's the Indian of Aseres Shiva and Yemei Kapirim, and the Rambam seems to like say both sides of the right. It's Yifel Oilam and says. Betzibber, beYuchid, nicht klar what he's going on, right? It's basically copy pasting the Gemara, but like, he does seem to try to do something with it. At least from putting it in there in this location, I think there's something going on. So anyway, wir sagen dem Farschen, mit schon sagen, kannst du wissen bringen der Gemara. Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't say anything. Right? And they all just bring the Gemara, shouldn't okay. What? No, they only learn Nigla. They don't learn this. Okay. One day we'll make a Rambam. I want to make a Rambam that's going to have only the... Not really, yeah, it's not outside. Even Sefer HaMaftach, Mamish Shvachamas when it comes to all these things. Amul brings most of the time he brings the people that argue with the Rambam. He doesn't bring the people that explain the Rambam. Ibshanepis. Amul, yeah, Amul. Also schwach. Not very. Yeah. I can't but even that, it's very hard. Yeah, it could be sometimes. I'm not kicking the Shiva. Besides the Sachen was mir gedenkt, aber nicht, he doesn't like, okay. Kitzer, then, interestingly, the Rambam in Pairik Gimel has this very interesting Pairik, which is also important for a lot of other reasons, because Pairik Gimel, basically, I think the context is something like this. The Rambam took this context from Rebbe Gon and this order, the structure, and earlier people. In other words, Hilchas Shiva. So Hilchas Shiva is saying you have to do Shiva. So just like we have Chalik Gapur, we sort of have to tell you what are the important things to do Shiva on. Right? In other words, ja, für jede kleine Sache darf man Tshiva tun, auf größten Avayres. For some reason, this is a question that everyone, I don't know why. I have to get to it, to understand it. Everyone, every edition that talks about Ilchas Tshiva thinks that part of this is to give you a list of which Avayres are Chumme, which Avayres are Kal, was darf man Taka Tshiva tun, was darf man nicht Tshiva tun, was darf man auch Tshiva tun, but it's not so important. I don't understand this. Maybe you understand this. Even the Bani Yoinen, right? Everyone in Shach has a list of mitzvahs. What's that? This thing? What's the Seifa Halacha Seifa? What's the Tshiva boy from Kli? And I ain't getting shechanurich. Ma hat so the classes. What's going on here? No.
He was very busy with Baltamia. After the Diak, and he gave the Tshiva. No Yemei oid, something like that. It's very general.
No.
He has a more general thing. As the Tshiva helped, if you invest mehr in Shtina Virus. Het er aangeneemd dort, as the Tshiva is, as in Teshuva zach Tshiva auch a specific chat. Tshiva is a gas mehr Jana Moire gemelech. There's one Tshiva, and that's it.
Okay, but that's not what it seems to say in all these places.
I know, it's a paket.
No, it could be.
And then in Mitchell, in Baltan Mitchell, the other Sachen in Tanaisen. So no, this is not the Kaniyah. That's the actual thing. That's not Tshiva. That's not the.
That's Rambamistish. That's very Rambamist. But the Getz Tshuva does seem to say that you have to fast. And
no fast, because you know, but it's
second the Pgam and so
specifically, that's not the Ikra Tshiva.
Verstehen. That's the Noid Vida. That's after. I know. That's after the Noid Vida. I know. That's another shmis. That's because they all accepted Noid Vida shit. Like yeah, Noid Vida is the first one that came out and said that Sivir Samiskla is not real. Everyone before him accepted that it's real. Yeah. Okay, it's not hard to. Yeah, I've had some. There's notes for this somewhere.
I mean,
the Ashkenazische Mistore was that you have to do tshiva. Then Noid Vida came and says, "If I stashtik, it's like mamish one of these radical chedishim." Like, and then I was fast jede shiny v'chamish. Like you always love these things. Like
I don't know, there's not the Eke. Okay, Bill Maas so fasten jede koiden mapur. Jede Jur so man auch het.
Yeah. But Kitzer. Yeah, because as jeder eine spricht auf the Rambam in this Rambam about Tshiva, and it's very interesting. The Rambam does go against the Gemara seemingly, both because the Gemara doesn't seem to say that Tshiva vatzokoye for the olam for yochid. It's much more fetish that at least Achag Zadin doesn't work. I'm going to say Gemara a whole year. And secondly, it doesn't say in the Gemara is much more beferish, and they bring Gemara in Tanis that Sibbe doesn't need Lev Shulam. Very two things with big lists of people that have discussion. So it's a quick. So this is how you see if it's popular, right? It's get the cash. So usually the things that only one person says here. Anything that is only one man welcome, something is wrong with that. And deny and the Altik and the Kitzer. So it's no. The Rambam. In other words, the Rambam was very clear, but just to not like have this in our head. Rambam did add that Shiva v'yufel oilam. He doesn't accept that. In other words, doesn't accept that you really need to be accepted by God's office. He really thinks that it really works as much. And secondly, even Tzibur, he doesn't think that works without kavuna and Shiva. Agam Pshat HaGemura is like that. So in other words, he is trying to be man with everything on.
Without Shiva?
Without kavuna, ich weiß, they bring Agmun and Tanis, that's
That's something else. Tefillah. No, is that Tzalach?
Yeah, but bringt Agmun and Tanis, man darf kicken.
Tzulis in the Skabel.
Da ist nicht meist Sibbe. Not sure. Okay, but Kitzer, that's what did I want to show, what I was looking here for. Oh, so that's the first thing that the Rambam, so he brings this in the Darkei Tshiva, and now I'm up to by the Gimel. Yeah, I was saying that the Rambam for some reason thought that it's very real, and not only the Rambam, not what I'm saying this, he just has his organization of it. Like this whole sigya of Mechzal, that's how they can Abayinani and Arusha and Apekoiris, and some reason therefore we have Hilchas Apekoiris and Hilchas Tshiva. This is all very important. You have to know, Apekoiris, then I better get to the Tshiva. Stam. And then he says, like in Mas, you always have to do Tshiva. So I think that this has something to do with this question. It's not like we say, Tshiva, to them everything is very... Not like in the Lowy you're saying that this is something that I like very much with the Rishonim, and we lost this very much, is that they have the clarity and sometimes they got to like deny other things. The Mushal, if you go say a drush, daf chivetin, I say once you say things dvurim shbelev, dvurim shbelev einem dvurim, right? So daf ikra chivet was the everyone's gonna feel bad. There's no way. How do you know that it were yotze? You don't know. It's forever fuzzy, wishy-washy. Nicht dass schlecht. Dvurim shbelev. But if you go to the Rav Sadiq and it says, look, figure out. Are you a Rusha Goma? Then you're in big trouble. Are you a Bainani? Then you're shtickle trouble. Then Yira Atzmoike, that's the Rambam's whole shtickle story here, right? Yira Atzmoike li Bainani, and then he brings the Indian from Iri Shaina Mishnascha somehow. If that in Yezeh no Hagi, you have to understand this somehow. I'm thinking of this now, all the things I read and the later people that interpret this, but you understand what I'm trying to get at? Kicking by the gimel. You die not, chiyas. If you have Rav Avonis, you die right away. Of course, the Rav says seriously, but okay. And that's another shtickle type. Then, Kshem Shashoklim, there's also Shoyklim Rosh Hashanah. So that in Halacha Dalet, Halacha Gimel. Tzadik, same thing. In other words, basically this klal that Tzadikim Bayin Rishum is also the same klal of Shlois Furim Meftochem. And therefore we have Tkiyas Shoyfe. And by the way, the Rambam, wow, and these 3 lines went into a whole his own Tkiyas Shoyfe Derusha. There's no shayachas with anything that anyone told him to say, right? They stick Halacha Dalet, kicken Paragim Halacha Dalet. You don't know, kannst dich schon ausfahren, because you can in yeshiva and at Tkiyas Shoyfe Derusha. But you realize the Rambam literally made up his whole Tkiyas Shoyfe Derusha as a nisht. Chitz von dem was the ganze Pshat sein and Tkiyas Shoyfe he made up by himself. It doesn't say anywhere before him. Literally, the first source of this idea is more or less the Rambam. Everyone, let me just be clear. Everyone before the Rambam understood that Tkiyas Shoyfe. You read, okay, maybe again the Tzadigun might be this too. It's kind of tefillah. Others, others Sahari Lefnei Melech Hashem. They read the Tzadigun's 10 reasons, more or less all of them, or something like that. The Rav Tzadigun has in the Vidraham. It seems it's from Sidra Sag. Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's his style at least. Yeah, I think it's from the Sidra Sag and Tzadigun Sata Sidra. I think it's there. But the Vidraham brings it. That's where everyone knows it from. I think. Originally everyone thought either it's some kind of tekes like the Megdash we do, that's the Mishnah brings that pussy, or it's a kind of tefillah. Yes. Right, it's a kind of tefillah. That's the second part. So both have tefillah, baby. It's tefillah shvach, tefillah tanis, it's basically the same concept. How do you beit the So one way is to talk, and one way to make a lot of noise. Maybe he's very high, and the Gashmis thing, maybe he's very far, and that's from Ofek. In other words, la'oider God, not la'oider people. And the Rambam comes and he turns it over and he says, we're trying to wake you up, not we're trying to wake up God. And this is the Chmamish. Imamish made this up by himself. Again, you could look at these people. Ist nicht du kein Bekar von das. Was? Maybe shtickle. Beside 10 tam means like, let me give you everything I could think of. When I have 10 tam, like, which is there? No, it could be. All these things that Rambam said, when I say made up, it's Tzadigun made it up. So nicht Chazal, so nicht how the Psik Chimish reads it, it's nicht how the Siddur reads it, and it's actually slightly the opposite of how the Chimish reads it. Because again, so the Chimish, everything is let's meet Mo'ir Rachmim, let's to the Benishlam, we could say other pshutim, maybe just the Nachruza that it's a new year. Why? We can't fragen the Leibel Minsbeck von Nach pshutim. And Kiyas Shoyfe. So nicht, maybe it's just like Tiki B'choy Shoyfe, but Kiyas Leib Chagayni. This is the Nachruza that Sikkis is coming. Okay. But the Rambam made everything into the idea of Chiva, so this is a very big Chiddush of his. And he also added this Remes, Kloimer, Iri Yeshayne Mishnaschem, Kitzner Dumme Tadamaschem, Chibshu Masayv, Chizbat Chiva, Zichli Berachem, Eile Shoychem is Emet B'havli Azman, the Shoygem Kol Shinusam Be'evel, Verika Shleev Le Yatzil, Bitler Shaykh, Mativa De Chachem Alach, Miaz Glech Mechem Dak, Yerumach Shavtesh Le Teva. These 4 lines, or whatever, someone should count how many things it says, how many clauses there are. There's a lot of them, and they're all philosophy. They're all the Rambam's way of understanding what a person's to do in the life. It doesn't say, what doesn't it say? It doesn't say, then Machal Shabuz and boiling this and stop doing that. It doesn't say God is mad at you and better do Chiva like the Rambam L'chayre. What does it say? And come vergessen the Emes by Havle Azman. The Bat Super likes to say that it means because the Hevel of the Shoyre. Okay, side. That's a Pikahula. And then Schlofen and Ktin is going to stove. Try to think of what your bad thoughts are. So he just mamish put in Misadrusha, Lias Tzadik,
He does it every so often.
Yeah, but it's always people. It's funny that people don't know it. People are like,
in Pishon Shaisis, like I know this Kinnish Duaran, but I just right.
But here he makes it Kimaran, and people always think that this is standard Misadrusha, and it's so unstandard Misadrusha. He literally talks about forgetting the truth in the Heavenly Asma. What is he even talking about?
They're not listening to what it says. They don't understand it. They don't know. They know the concepts here.
Ich weiß auch nicht, was der Kant, ich weiß exactly, was meint Heavenly Asma. What's the truth? Yeah.
What do you mean? Whatever, the Diasamitius, you know.
Ich verstehe.
You know.
No, there's a lot of poetic language here. Ich verstehe.
They're coming to know God and, you know, and being right. Whatever. This is...
So then it says,
but the standard yeshiva man reads it in Nitzos Tzat Richtig.
It's auch emes, but that's not what it says. Not every that.
No, it is, but it's from Mature. And I'm also tell you that you should do also but because that's the way to get the truth.
But the language is not the language. You wouldn't say you're over of Bittul Torah. It says you're forgetting the truth.
Exactly.
And of course, the way to get to that is by Torah and so on.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But the regular,
It's very interesting.
He doesn't read. He reads it at Emes. Oh, yeah, of course, the Torah is Emes. So he means that. He doesn't chap what this terminology is very.
So, okay, so that's his drush of Kishref. Now, this is the Rambam putting Kishref into the context of Aseres Matshiva, which is probably true. In other words, he understands, and of course, the Shoifer Weizach, we'll see in more he has more language about this. He seems to understand that where did the Gemara get this idea of Aseres Matshiva and Yom Kippur? They got it. It says in the Pusik, Rishun it wasn't Shoifer, and Yom Kippur is Bechaper. So they say, oh, this is a Mahaler. This is a Psa. Nicht so ich min Pshat afille. And the Rambam also does this, so to connect the Shoifer into this, and he says. And then somewhere in the middle he talks about Chetzi Zaki v'Chetzi Chayev. In the end of Alucha Dal it says, of course this is not really Aluchas, right? That's the real Aluchas, so it's really... Oh, you don't have it, sorry. But Ba'in Zeh is a third, it's 3 Aluchas Alucha Dal. Because it is another thing, the Drick is a Mamish nicht understand. Any Rambams that's about Aguda, they just put it all ein größer Alucha, I was nicht. If Ba'in Zeh, Nahagi Kol Beis Yisrael, so this is a minig. It's an ancient minik, probably. The Harbis Bitzluk of Master, when last mitzvah for Shuna, when we are calling message Shuna. When I kill him looking, but Laila, but Aseres, Laila, Balbat, Kamsis, Biduchnim, the requisition that you're, this is the entirety of Cheslichas in the Rambam. It's so funny, like there's a whole cipher of Cheslichas somewhere in this forum store. This is all of it. Yeah. So. Slichas?
They don't say Slichas.
Aseres Matshiva?
Okay. What's this? Was a Yom Tov.
So, lass mal sehen, ob sie du.
Doesn't make any sense.
Okay, lass mal sehen, ob sie du noch einen Platz, was der Rambam redet wegen dem. I think that's all. Let me see, just in Parik sein, does he talk about Rosh Yom Kippur? No, it doesn't, right? That's all. This is the ganze Parik Vov. Now, where's the Parik of... No, it doesn't talk more about this Indian, right? There's a lot of talk about Gedol Tshuva and Sachen. Yeah, that's all that so this is the only place that Rambam mentions Aseres Matshiva. And here, but his framing is also important. Kodim Kol, his framing is that it's a minig, it's an alte minig, alte Yiddish minig, right? So in other words, he doesn't also say apply in Zeh Hashem Kurev. See. He interestingly why did he separate these two things? We learned earlier that his Tshuva is good all the time, and it's Yufa Beyoyser and Aseres Matshiva. And it doesn't say him, if Zeh, yesh lokim lo mislichas, but Aseres Matshiva. Steht nicht das. Steht, it's just a locha by itself. And then, somehow in the middle of Bayern Kimmel, it's Mipnai Zeh. And steht man auf Aseres Matshiva, man sagt Slichas, mit mehr Mitzvahs and so on. No, so wasn't the pshat. Yeah, of this, the Achronim are worried. I think that there's a machloikes if this Pnain Zeh means a Pnain Zeh shall Yirat Memechze Zaki Femechze Chayev, or Pnain Zeh means Pnain Zeh Shoykol Nevleis of Shludam, but it's Shunais. That's what these people say. Well, because of the Tekiyah it woke you up, so therefore you're gonna...
Gotta go.
But in between he put in Lefika Chira Atzma, Chetzi Zakev, Chetzi Chayev. Was kim des an? It's weird, this whole place, this whole location, who give a car, how steht Käufer in beide Gimel, should say in beide Gebäude, ich meine. Okay, I about teretz. Maybe we'll get to my teretz. We'll have to see the other places in the Rambam. I thought about teretz today and we'll have to think if it's true. I think that what the Rambam was trying to answer here is that it's very weird to have yearly tshuva. That's what he's worried about, that's why he got into this idea. Because tshuva is, when there was syndics, that maybe every day, after some mitzvah tmidas, after some mitzvah mikres, when you sin, you should do tshuva. But yearly tshuva is very weird. Every Tisha we're doing yearly. So I think the Rambam's teretz that is that since most people are buying him. In other words, if you talk about either tzaddik gomer or rusha gomer, then it wouldn't make sense to have a yearly tshuva because you're good. But since most people are, that's the reality, most people are somewhere in between. And since being Rav is important, that's something we have to understand how it makes sense in the Rambam's world. But we can sort of make it make sense. It's, it's always such kind of illogical thing, this Chetzizak, this binary. Make sure to not be a ganz narusha. That's the reality. Most people are not extreme. They're somewhere in between. So therefore, having a yearly program of adding some mitzvahs to the count makes sense. And taking off some avirus. You understand? Obviously, the Rambam has a very practical understanding of Aseres Matshiva that. And then you'll see, I'll show you his later people say this very much nicer. Pshat is, nish pshat, now there's the end of the world is coming, there's a din, therefore you have to pink faggot. I think the Rambam... Because he's auf größer Zures. Ein normaler Mensch darf ein paar machen sich, also geht nicht über, sie drapst drüber gesagt. Ein Mensch hat, jeder hat der Bauch voll mit Schrutz, man darf machen sich noch nicht gehen. You have to make sure that doesn't, like you have to clean once a year, because otherwise, that's an idea that we have also. And the Rambam is saying that, and I think that the Rambam, when he says Din Rosh Hashanah, I think he really, because we'll get to that in another, I'll check with other Tashir. Because the Rambam doesn't, of course, really believe that there's a Din Rosh Hashanah. He openly says that that's not true, literally. It's only when we say that there's a Din Rosh Hashanah, what we're saying is, this is a case of us saying, Lo'olim Yiru D'mach Tzazaka. In other words, since there's every single day, the Rambam says openly, at least the Meiri says openly in Shettas Rambam, that the truth is like Rabbi Yossi, that with Mechol Yom. Yeah, this is the emes. I'll leave it objectively. Meaning to say, there's continuous chava. However you understand that, but it's true. Now, so what's this? Udam nidden b'rishuna and so on. It's because again for the same reason, because you tell them every day. Okay, so this tzaddikim that are every day good, there's a shun that are not. But most people, it's hard for them every day. It's normal mensch. So once a year we make a show out of it. We tell you today is the day where you're mechtzazak and mechtzachai, and make sure these 10 days. This way, hopefully, but for the next year, it's halten a bissel the coming batters. That's I think that what I'm saying. I think that's why the Rambam sort of sticks the whole idea of Rosh Hashanah Kippur, the minig, the fact that we try to become better once a year, into this sigya of binary and mechtazakim. That's at least the pshat is mechant angefallen. It's not the sense doesn't mean that it's true, but it's just a thought because I read the Meiri and the I'll show you inside the sources that I read that I think say this. At least they say this beferish. It's in the Rambam. There's gemeint just angefangen. That could be a good pshat for the Rambam.
What is it? They say so. How do they understand? Like the
I'll show you. They don't. They're very stuck. Religion is less stuck.
So in Lubavitch they have a whole.
The Lubavitch goes with that a different pshat, but generally
they have a whole way how to do this.
Yeah.
They have what with the din. They have a whole riff about this din.
I know, but. Right, the flat and the klalich weiß. But they also think that it's not real. Okay. The Lubavitch are very big Rambamisten. They don't know about it, but they're very big Rambamisten.
Yeah, okay.
What did I gewollt wasen? Okay. So now the Rambam, where's the other place? The Rambam talks about it, Aseres Shiva and a few more places. Yeah, some of them, sometimes. No, they're very much Rambamistim, and I'll get to this in the sense that they really believe that God is mifshit and doesn't really exist in all these things. It's all just a game. I think that's what I mean when I say that. Okay. So wie redt Rambam wegen Tshiva? Okay. So we have to look in Moed Nevoichem. Pshat, in other words,
So I say initially the Eid Kippur, Kippur, okay, Panusa, you know, like.
of course not. It's not
No, but
very.
it's always has a nothing. You know, you can't get face value. There's all this something.
Okay, so what's the Rambam in Ilchus in Moed Nevoichem wegen Shiva? I have a list of a nicer list somewhere. I'm gonna organize it. Let's sham. Stitzig du, so nicht. Darf Shiva days, huh? It's nicht so else. Inzwischen the ganze Jahr. This is see. That's why you have to once a year. I don't know what happened. Got wet or something. Okay. No, I don't see the Pele. Okay. Bekitzer, in Ilchus, in Moed Nevoichem, but I want to focus on the Teshuva Shiva. I'm just going to tell you where it talks about Shiva. In Moed Nevoichem and Tamya Mitzvahs, I don't think anywhere else it talks about Shiva. Only in Tamya Mitzvahs. In Chaligim, first in Parik Lamadai, in the first, if you see the Kvitzer the Shoyne, Parik Lamadai Chaligim. That's one shtickle. And then we have to go to trying to see where he talks about Aseres Shiva. Probably only Membaris, where by the Me'adim, right? Okay, so let's go through all of them so we should sort of get the basic context.
Which Kvitzer?
The first one, literally the first one, Kvitzer Rishoyna, where he's organizing the mitzvahs, he's saying every mitzvah has its own ta'am. He says, number one, the first is Sefer HaMada, basically, Shandai Sisoidis, I'm reading this translation, this is Hilchas Sisoidat Teure. And then he says, Bekvitza zi nechlele gam at Shiva v'atanias, k'mo shavar, and Lamed Vov, okay? Okay, that Adkan, that's the only Adkan L'Shoyna. Then this is the Rambam explaining himself why Hilchas Shiva is Hilchas Sisoidat Teure, right? So he says Hilchas Shiva belongs to Sisoidat Teure. Why? Interestingly, this also has to do with what I was saying earlier, that Rambam organized Hilchas Shiva, he pushed in a lot of Ikrim into it somehow. But really, because he sees, so let's just think what I think it says. It's the Rambam understands that Shiva, or at least a lot of the Darkei Shiva, are about Knuyas Dais Nechonis, right? And Tanis, which includes Yom Kippur and all the other Tanaisim, right? Tanis, like the Rambam explained Hilchas Tanis, not on Takanan and Hilchas Ramad, but also was about explaining you Hashgacha and so on. Okay, so then if we look in Parak Lamed Vov, which is actually going through this thing, we do. Let's go to the end of it. Over here, that's us 5. We talked about Shiva. First, he talks about, right? So you guys, let's just, very basically, what the Rambam says here is, right? Anything that's about the truth, I don't have to explain, because that's the Tam itself. That's nicht kan Sach, was a far epis. That's the Lishma, really, right? And then he says, therefore, Talmud Torah is part of this, and being Mechaber Talmud Chum is part of this, and Lishuv Vishmo is part of this somehow. And then, the Tzivi Lizok Ba'is Tzura is part of this. So this is the Rambam explaining the famous Shikol Nechas Shiva, which we talked about 1,000 times. And then he ends up with this Burish Gamat Shiva, even a Kvitza Azais. Klarim and Adayas. So it's very interesting how this is a Chiddush, this Shikol. It doesn't say it similarly in other places. In other words, first he says, by Shiva, to explain, that when he says Tanas, he says, what's the point of this? That through this we know that she is Alamastigas Matzavayni, if Shabidu Lesaknam. So it's 3 things that God knows, and if you go a little earlier, and he talks about mitzvahs ve'oitzim v'chatzoitzres, I have slightly different paragraphs than you. It says that God knows. In other words, he has some kind of idea, and he has ashkocha taknam. If we're gonna be duchiv, and we should not believe that it's mikra. And then he brings his touch and the valachtim mikeri pusik. That believing that it's mikra is what? Valachan it's tavani. I'm skipping around. Therefore, we have to be Lizik lefun of Baistur. So again, the Rambam has a functional description account of tefillah, right? Zaka. Zaka is not so that God should help you. Right? Although that's literally what he says. It's very weird. Yeah, people don't notice this. It's very clear about this, right? Because the Rambam says, tefillah is, Tanis is us telling you, why did you say, nish b'mikra, nish stam, no, well, God is mad at you because you didn't have either. And then if you do chivil, it can come better. And that's why we're expelled by a Tanis. Nish v'zehi at tefillah by a Tanis. Nish. And tefillah is us, because tefillah is no shaykh with anything really. The tefillah is just a way of advertising the fact that you have to do tshuva. It seems to be very clear about this, as far, at least the way I read it. Maybe you could read it more traditionally. In other words, tefillah is not real. Tefillah is just an advertisement that you should do tshuva. This is also going to explain the tzaka of Aseres tshuva and so on. And then he says another thing. I think this is, I'm going to connect now to the idea. Yeah, it's not. But what about, and what's the maskuna of these dayas nechonis? The Rambam, the dayas nechonis are more important than the maskuna of them, because it's backwards, right? The daya is always the point. So you have to say the point of us being mispal al atzuris is that we should know that God cares about tzuris, and we have to do tshuva. Not that's us doing tshiva. That's not doing tshiva, because doing tshiva is becoming better. No shaykh with being mispal. Fasting is maybe it's all aychatim to remind you to do tshiva. Stimmt?
Yeah.
And then he says something very interesting. Burish, agam tshiva men akvitza azois. Kloima men adayes shematzias bnei adas lo tias adira elim aminim b'hem. So he has already a like a minute of style thing almost, right? It doesn't say that Shiva is true. But what's Shiva? As distinct from what we said before. Shiva is a belief that nobody would be religious if they wouldn't believe in it. So therefore it's important. So maybe it's also true, but he's not interested in it being true right now. Why? Because people sin. Why do they? What kind of sins do they have? By the way, again, the Rambam was this description of sins. Either because he's dumb. What says yeah? Because they think they have their own mistakes, or they have midas, which the Rambam seems to also connect to that interestingly. Or letov, right? So there's basically two kinds of avirus: so malas hamidas and malas sichlius, right? Either you could have a mistake, you could think that God is a gift or whatever, made a mistake, or you could have a bad midday, which you think is good. So it's also sort of a sichlistic midday. In other words, he's not really talking about Yitzchok yet, right? He's talking about was gemeint, dass es gibt zu seiner Kassen, and it's not good. Or I don't know, something like that. I don't know what is an example of a midday that you made a mistake about. Is that what it says also there? Something like that? Interesting. Like, what kind of a... What kind of a mitzvah do people really think is good? Ich weiß nicht. No, maybe you like the Rambam would say, you're not b'derech ha-mitzvah. You think that it's good to fast. And
today we have a lot of things like that, like debate and basic. I saw the whole article.
Der Schnur ist eine gute Sache, eine schlechte Sache. Okay, I hear. Oh, yeah, that does it.
No, that's a whole article for catching thing, but it's just thing. It's very interesting.
Who wrote an article about this?
What's his name?
Menachem Nabat? Yeah.
Yeah,
Very nice
article.
Yeah.
He has very nice article.
And Tzurechini wrote it?
I'll get from Shulhara. Very nice.
Yeah. I know it. I didn't read Tzurechini, but I read this. I saw him talking about this on English.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, maybe that's side. No, it's important what he said. But but I think the Rambam was thinking about this example. We have to think what the Rambam was thinking about.
No, but today, what like such like base. But they like people have all these types of ideas, like what they call
Pleasure.
Moral. No, what they call how they call it today? The mensch was gewazen how moral he is, and he's a signaling.
No. Virtue signaling? No.
Yeah, whatever.
So.
Maybe they're more.
Okay, beside this is okay. That's clear. Because which religion is right? That's not. Right. It's not exact. Okay, we can't tell. I don't think the Rambam was thinking about that. The Rambam was thinking more of someone. Maybe someone has a tuas. He's not b'derech ha-mitzvah. He thinks it's good to be
inclusiveness and equality. I mean,
okay.
I'm not doing that king them. I'm just saying where there's a whole big mukam.
Okay, no. Besides, but that's moral debate. No, I think the Rambam is thinking. Could be. I think the Rambam is thinking probably more of someone. Like he's talking about the Derech HaMetz, right? Maybe someone that thinks that, someone that thinks that it's good to give away all your money for tzedakah. It's not good. You have to something like that. So that's a mistake. Or probably that's why do I think of maybe the guy doesn't give any tzedakah because Albert Fazich, right? These are tourists. Just to Derech HaMetz. Okay, but kids, just to explain. The Ilya. So then, Lamaster, why we need Shiva? Why do we need a minute of Shiva, right? The Das of Shiva. Willi hem in udam ein marpel shever ze loilam he maspet betei so will have heute idea so machst du nesle eins so there's a problem of years das very brestle stück Rambam ach amunas hat shiva ma fer sheres le lachs limit the lush of the matter 12 years for shlim years ma shebel fnachet. So the Rambam is giving a very human failure understanding account of why we have shiva. In other words, there might be a truth of shiva which is just that you get better. But here he's saying, why do we have to talk about it so much? Why do we have to make it into why is it like a thing? So it's a thing because most people are not tzaddikim. And without Shiva, they probably will come worse or they'll never become better. So we have to make Shiva into a thing. And therefore, and then he says, L'chain, this is literal, L'chain rubi hamas ma mekav masadai azois, and L'choyna, it's true, and me'ilamoid, interesting. So if you medai, interesting. It's both true and, yeah, of course it's true. Maybe it's only limited how it's, maybe we exaggerate how true it is because could you really? I'm sorry, it's generally true. Maybe like the Rambam says, you can be Moshe Rabbeinu. You can't really be Moshe Rabbeinu. Come on, but but maybe we say it that way because it's moral. Could you really undo? Yeah. Could you undo if you killed someone? Not really, right? That's why we have Chalik Kapura, really. They're trying to get at this idea. And Rambam is trying to take away Chalik Kapura because he thinks that it's a Mania, maybe. Yesh line. Let's think about the moil, right? Kabunis Levedian, the Kabunis Alash Gugas, Megamal Chalik Mazdan. Which doiners have Kabunis? Only Meila, right? Things like that. Asham Gazal, Shamilis are Kabunis Alamized, right? There's only two, I think, right? But Kabunis like Mized. Usham Gazalis, I think, and Usham Melis. Maybe not. Usham Gazalis at least seems to be on the Mized dozen. The Rambam says, the Rambam has explanation that it's a klein Avaira. Perhaps I'll tell you out wegen dem.
No, there's sort of
There's a few.
Shvi also, right? Right, that's a Shom
Yeah, Shvi Zaylis. Yeah.
That's a Shom Zaylis.
Yeah, okay. But Kitza, the reason for this is Vilitanias. Okay. And then the Rambam has interesting language. There's a Psashtira and then there's a Gersuas, how to read it. This is what it says in this Gersa. Duvra Mashitev Lachiva Mekol Chet, Yazivusai, Vizi Tachlisa Shal Dayazi. How does he read? He says something different. How does the last...
So it's after Tachlisa Shal Dayazois,
that's the end, but before that, right before that, what does this even mean? So according to this translation, what it means is, so according to what this seems to mean here is that, at least how they translate it, that's clearer to me here, is that, in other words, this Vidiyam and Karbonis and Tanis, these are all advertisements, and this is all to get you to stop sinning. That's the Duva Mashittif. Duva Mashittif Lachiva. These has a Tzivi Akludi Kili. There's another Tzivi last Chiva. What's the point? According to him, it's the Rambam going back to his idea that these are all Darkei Chiva. And why are they important? Kedai Lefarsim Amunas Chiva. Because people will assume that there's no Chiva, they'll become worse. And this is all, the tachlis of this idea is that you should get better. Right? It's not that you should believe in, you should be Breslev and see that God loves you. Anyways, the tachlis of that is that you should get better. Okay, and that's the Rambam's place where he says why Chiva is a useful thing, right? It's true. I think this is really what he says, right? It's true. It's useful because of the idea of, right? Again, it's useful because it's very interesting, right? Again, the Rambam said in Lamed Gimel, in Lamed Hai, that Chiva is part of this, is part of Aknuyas Dayas Nechayanas, right? And the reason for that, he says, is the reason why Chiva is Rom the Dayas Nechayanas is because it's like one of the Yisodat Torah in the sense that a religious society needs it. It's also true, but I don't think he's so interested in that part. At least here, he's Madgish more. He's Madgish more the part of, if you want to make a religion, you have to have Chiva for it. Because otherwise, you're going to very quickly end up with a bunch of people that are not interested. Very interesting way of understanding it, right? And therefore, we have a lot of masim that are about this, like Karbunas and Tanias, and probably also Aseres Chiva, right? And he says this openly, right? That's what you were saying in Peirik Mem. And down in Peirik Mem, no, is this? Koidekol in Mem Aleph, just so we see. He talks about Yom Kikuris and Yom Kippur. Mem Aleph is it's a very long Peirik, so you have to find it. Peirik Mem Aleph. Peirik Mem Aleph, zog the Rambam. Oh, you see it? Where is it? So one reason, because it's hard to fast. Probably, so we have to... because this is important. I'm in a bit Shiva, so Paisach is Mitzrayim, and Yom Kippur is Shiva, which is... So this Kuris on eating Yom Kippur, why? Because it's an important mitzvah, because it gives us the Das HaShiva, or Minas HaShiva, however they translate it, right? But this doesn't talk about Aseres HaShiva. And where did it talk about Aseres HaShiva? In Peirik Mem Gimel, where he talks about, back on going right in the beginning, right? Le'inin Tzayim Yom Kippur. It doesn't say Aseres HaShiva. I remember they said.
By the Shofar.
By Shofar? Okay. So 1 second. So in Peirik Mem Gimel, Peirik Mem Gimel steht das so. Yeah, go to Peirik Mem Gimel. Peirik Mem Gimel is where is the Peirik of Sefer's Manim. Yeah. You're gonna see it in the Rishon. Yeah. Okay, so Peirik Mem Gimel in As 3, according to these people, it says that Yom Kippur has a tambur el haknes as rein Shiva, and then he gives a reason. Okay, this is an important shtickle for me because this is what I have to get to today. why Yom Kippur, right? We really want to start. We flew into a lot of side things, but what's Yom Kippur special, right?
Yeah.
And the Rambam says like something like this: Hi hayom, and we have to understand what he means when he says these kind of things. Hi hayom she udan anzim yud beim nichas shnias. Ibisam chilas chatma gutel. So this is based on some cheshbon that Chazal had, right? That it turns out that the lichas shnias were given on Yom Kippur. Doesn't say anywhere. Nicht in the pusik, right? It's like a mamashech shtickle teire. Let's know. They cheshbon, they counted mem yom, and they ended up somehow on Yom Kippur based on a whole bunch of cheshbonis. It's in Sechtes, yeah, and in the Sigya of Chamashus Bov, it's the cheshbon over there.
Okay.
They counted 120 days somehow. It's not clear because it's not clear that there were 3 mem yoms. It's their way of understanding. We tried there were only 2 mem yoms. But Akapunem, the Chazal understood somehow that it turns out that Yom Kippur was that. We don't know. It's very interesting because it's like a time of, if this is the time why Yom Kippur is that day, and it's built, it should have said, Ki vayom hazeh, hoyu lichas neimas alachti. Like Pesach is open, right? Pesach, which is the Shtayt Ki vayom hazeh, it was something like that. And it doesn't say Yom Kippur such a thing. It just says randomly Ki vayom hazeh chapa. With Kili, and this is interesting. Kili Chazal or the Rambam has a kasha favos. Was that best? So, was kenne ich an? Weiß nicht, was nicht. Why do we need a reason for this? There's a very interesting. You could say it's a matter. Shock the mother wants to connect. If it's a slich, so must because the slich like Zayre Shova. The first slich was Yom Kippur. We could even say that it's not literally, maybe just connecting the idea. They didn't have the whole cheshbon to connect it. Okay, so it was literal. But the Rambam seems to take this very seriously. Interestingly,
Yeah.
I don't know why. Why is he taking this so seriously? Right? Because there's mechila sachet, v'nasa yoim oisa yoim le'ad yoim tshiva v'avoida greida, v'lechayin shoyfs moim kolanu gifnes, b'kol ha'shtad v'telas gifnes. So this is the Rambam's shvisas Yemei Kippurim being both achil, shvisa me'achila and shvisa me'malocha. Why? Magbil masan levidim kol noit zavayaz lushem b'em. Also again, this is the Rambam's definition of vidi. Vidi means, so this is the loy kamen cheschenach, all these achronim that think that vidi is, the Rambam thinks that vidi is the mitzvah, not shiva. The Rambam literally says that when I say vidi, I mean the point of vidi is to do shiva. But anyways, yeah. So vidi mean doing shiva. Nicht so wie die Chronim was busy sagen as the Rambam hat gelernt, dass vidi is the mitzvah, nicht shiva, and all kind of technical reasons like that. Okay, that's another shtickle time.
There's a bit. I mean, we have you look and read the Rambam, even in yeah, that's personal name or whatever. But
Yeah, no.
that's vidi is the way of expressing it, shiva.
Right. But what I'm I'm asking. Beside, but vidi is not important. Really, the vidi is not ma'akiv. Kili, and Rambam's maybe in the lochadik is ma'akiv because we need it to be mefarsim. We need to, in some way.
I think
Maybe interestingly, I'm thinking.
Like because look, the Rambam, it's also the Rambam's chiva, yeah, vidi not chiva, right? That's the way that he reads it. He says Mondus makes a lot of sense. He says because Stein shuf my chiva. It's not the chiva no to the Rambam like you said. Chiva might offer him tinavitis. That's not a mitzvah. That's all the mitzvahs, right? So
Right, that's what the Lamdam say.
Chiva.
But that's
so
what I'm disagreeing with.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So but if you want to knight you a little better, you want to say a little better, it shouldn't be. That's the vidi just as word. Vidi is like, because she usually when a person decides to be a daf tzazan, or the ganze toilet is up, the daf tzazan I get to eat. So the he's decides to do that. So the mitzvah is bring this whole thing l'fnei Hashem.
Right, but that's what I'm disagreeing with this. That's not what I understand. I understand it the other way around. I understand that the Rambam is wants to find the makar. He thinks to be a mitzvah because otherwise he's just making stuff up. Okay. And he wants to kind of make the idea of doing shiva, which is an idea. It's a masa. It's both an idea, in other words, in the sense of that we need people to believe it in order to become better, and it's the concept of actually becoming better, right? So
you become better by becoming better. What's the problem?
Exactly. So why is
what's this new thing of shiva?
The new thing is that people don't become better by default. We need to figure out a way to get them to become better. That's the concept idea, and therefore. Especially people that are behind him, that are not good. So we tell them, so we make into a whole process. And we say vidi, which is, maybe this is, and vidi is a way of being, both of being mefarsim, the Inyan Achiv and something. Now maybe that's why the whole shmis of vidi maybe has to do with this, because the Rambam needs Shiva to be a public thing, because otherwise we're not being makna das at Shiva, not being mefarsim that Shiva works. And secondly, I would say that to him Vidi is just the mekar and the Torah of the Rayan at Shiva. Because wie steht in the Torah as Shiva arbet? The mitzvah is steht by Vidi. Because that's how the Rambam gets into the whole idea that really Ikki Yom Kippur and Ikki Kapunis are Shiva. It doesn't say in the Torah Shiva, but Vidi steht. And Vidi means Shiva. So it's like a Pnimis and Chetzonius. The Pnimis of Vidi is doing Shiva. And since the Pnimis, like all other mitzvahs, just like Shabbos, do the mitzvah, and the idea is the Chiddush Olam, whatever. It's not different. So in other words, the Rambam, the diachas between Vidi and Shiva is not like you're saying, that Shiva daf anyways team and Vidi is just that's the Ikka mitzvah, is just telling you how to do Shiva. It's not important how to do Shiva. It's important for practical reasons, but it's not what the Torah is really getting. It's the other way around. We want you to do Shiva. And how do I tell you, how does the Torah say it that? The Torah that not v'nush belev. How do I make it mefirsim? Or in other ways, where does the Rambam find the pnimius of Shiva in the Torah? He found it in Vidi. Because that's what, and how did he find it in Vidi? Because he decided that the Nisach HaVidi is lo echtuoid. So therefore Vidi means not like it's din, vizok me Vidi lo echtuoid. Doesn't, by the way, there's another thing that doesn't say in Nisach HaVidi, the Rambam made it up also, but at least that was his connection. That's how we got from the Pusik to the idea of Shiva.
So
Understand?
what are you saying different than me?
You're saying that Shiva daf anyways teen, and Vidi is not a heiche timtz, it's like a get. Similar, people say it, like similar to a get. Get is a get. Visa is chal the get. When you die, schreiben 12 sheets, whatever, not 12 sheets, but whatever the Nisach Tam Akiv is, right? That's how people understand. It's like a mitzvah kiyum is Shiva. I'm saying, of course it's not. Shiva is Veren Bese. Now, wie steht in der Torah am kein Veren Bese? Bei Vidi. Shiva is to stop sinning. Wie steht stop sinning in Chemish? Wie steht, or another way of saying it, wie steht this in the Welt? The Welt doesn't see that yet.
It's not the Eitzim of Shiva? I mean, you think that
it's not the definition of mitzvah Shiva is not to say how to do Shiva by doing Vidi, right?
Of course, no. So,
the definition is to do Shiva.
The mitzvah is Vidi.
No, auch it nicht. The mitzvah literally, in the sense of the mitzvah, where you find it in the Chemish. It's a very practical, technical question. Nicht in the sense of that's the Gedra mitzvah. Exactly. No, you're Bakaino No, by doing Shiva. Exactly. Again, it's not halachic mitzvahs eser. I don't know if the Rambam has bechlal this idea of halachic mitzvahs eser. L'shem ichet. No, because the whole you have to go. I know, but you have to go back to the whole idea. The whole idea of the Rambam doing mitzvahs is to organize. Okay, this goes back to what I keep on saying, that the Rambam's whole sefer mitzvahs are not about defining what mitzvahs is. It's about finding where in the Torah it says everything, because that's the structure of Yiddishkeit. Where just like the mitzvahs of Minna. Nicht wie sie mekayim mitzvahs neulich, wir wissen, dass du a Gott. It's ich darf dich verstehen, aber so wissen, dass du a Gott in der Torah, and therefore I made it into a mitzvah. It's like menulan. The mitzvahs, Tariq mitzvahs are really menulan of the Rambam's ideas. They're not what he's trying to get at. It's where he's coming from.
Yeah, okay.
That's why it's different. Okay.
I mean, at least in the Rambam, he pretends that it's.
No, but I'm not only halfways, because a lot of things are not mitzvahs and they're part of it. The mitzvahs are the organizing principle of Sefer Hayad, but they're not all of it. Even in Draisis, there's a lot of things where the Rambam just starts with a mitzvah and then like halachas aili yesh shloisha mitzvahs, whatever, and then there's a lot of things that are not none of them. And what is this? Tafastin? Yeah, is it a mitzvah? It somehow belongs to this category of this mitzvah. And the Mepharshim are very worried about that mitzvah, how to understand these things. Okay, that's another. Okay, let's not fly too far away. The question of it is another question. What do I get from here? Two things that are very interesting in this shtickle that I need to know. Okay, number one, we have this. We already know that Yom Kippur is about making. I say the word advertising just to make it more clear, right? About propagandizing that you could achieve. And Vidi is also about that. That's why this public Vidi, that's what I thought of now. Then maybe that's why we have this whole distinction between private Vidi and public Vidi. Is a ganze Schmiss. And okay, and there's two things. Firstly, there's also another thing Yom Kippur, which the Rambam seems to say, by the way, which is that it's a Yemei Avoda. Stam, like at least one. Because the Rambam real Avodah Hashem would be Yom Kippur a whole year. He says it's Yom Avodah Graida. In other words, it's like modeling what real Avodah Hashem would look like not eating and not doing Malucha, because Malucha are just like attempts to the Rambam to Avodah Hashem. And one day they can do pure Avodah Hashem. But I don't think that's as mamish the same thing as Shiva. You see, there seems to be two Nikidas in Yom Kippur. But interesting, maybe the Rambam, that's what Shiva is. You understand? There's one thing Shiva is take care of that virus, take care of whatever chesronis you have. Let's even not a virus. And another thing is precious, which seems the Rambam say Yom Kippur is about precious, about Esbodis, however you want to call it. And he seems to somehow connect these two things. In other words, I would say that the Rambam would understand that Shiva is that. Was mein Shiva team? Stofen Havel has a man. That's a lernen, whatever. That's a trachten. And what do we do in Yom Kippur? Exactly that. We also spend most of our time saying vidis. So that's the problem. Going to the Rambam, there should be a psashir in Yom Kippur, where Isaac and as if in the Gemara, where learned in Lechs Yom Kippur, it says in Lechs Yom Kippur that you're allowed to go at Savuri B'mayim l'kal up Nai Rabbi. We got lernen. We got mit Yom Kippur got me lernen. Doesn't say. Why can't he say Shegi Yom Kippur? Bleiben kasuk tilla. Even allowed to be over on the shtickle Isser Achitza or whatever. So, okay, ich weiß nicht. Okay, besides, then I would say that it helps you with Vaikis or whatever. Okay. The interesting thing is that the Rambam had to connect it. He needed to have a reason. This is interesting because I would say this is a nice medrash. As a stakadei. Generally, you ask Eid, why is Yom Kippur the 10th day of Tishra? Yom Kippur. Nobody would say, like on Pesach, they say it. Today's it is Chanukah, that was the Nes Chanukah. Sikkis, Anana Kuvit, nobody exactly knows. Everyone knows the Grus Torah that Anana Kuvit came back. But, beside it, Kasha Famas, this is Eichel Anana Kuvit. In Rishon Yom Kippur, how does Rishon Yom Kippur? Nobody says, so Rishon Bechlal. The Rambam would say that Rishon is Achun of Yom Kippur. You see, he doesn't have why is Rishon. Let's see what he says by Rishon. Look what he says. Rishon 7. He literally says that Rishon is a Psicha Yom Kippur. And in 7, and a little further after Shvius and Matzah, he says, yeah. Yem Echad. So first he says, why is it only one day? Yem Tshiva ve'uras pnei udam etadus. So it's Yem Tshiva. Ve'uras, interesting. He doesn't say Yem Adin. Very interesting. Yeah. See? He just skips the whole Yem Adin and Nevaichem. Wow, this is going to prove what I was saying earlier, that the Rambam's Yem Adin, that it says in Paira Gimel, is really just a way to get us to Tshiva. Right? Rishon is Yom Tshiva, and Ha'uras pnei udam etadumusam hadusis. This is this. How does? I hate this translation. How does Ibn Tibon say?
He says, "This is my Hesed Chadash."
I like it.
What's the same in the thing?
Want me to read Arabic? Was help me? I can't say Arabic. We should learn Arabic. Which I'm gonna get one with Arabic. Just l'shem. With the kids, I should be just to learn nothing. What's up? A friend
is working on Arabic.
I can learn. Who then? Why don't we bring him to his tower here? Oh. And Arabic auch. Maybe he'll help us understand more in Arab. And where's the kid of okay, whatever. Gets it from Tardemaskan. This is the Rambam translating himself, right? Because this is what it says in Nachas Shiva. Okay, so Yom Kippur Rishon is all about. That's why it's only one day. Why only one day? Oh, because earlier he said that the only reason we have 7 days is because Anish Vetzich Kazach. But Rishon is really a whole week. In other words, it's really 10 days. The Chaim talking about B'Shev, Moshe Ba'alim Mishne Torah, right? V'hike en achuna ipsicha liyem atzayim. Rishon is achuna liyem Kippur. Moshe Torah and what charaya? What's my raya that Rishon is just the opening day of the Tshiva, Aseres Matshiva stage, right? Because we see the minig Aseres Yemei, this is the Rambam is very, by the way, these language in the Moira are always very, very mediac. Aseres Matshiva are mefirsim mekabulas ima. It's not like true. It's mefirsumas. Not literally mefirsumas from Pairik Bayes, but it's, how does he translate? Yeah, in other words, it's known. In other words, if you ask the Rabbi why Aseres Matshiva, well, Aseres Matshiva is Aseres Matshiva. Well, Yedana Vais, that's Aseres Matshiva. He does go back earlier to say that, again, I would be medayik from this, that he doesn't think that it's real. It's useful, and it's mefirsim that Aseres Matshiva is that. I think what is mefirsim Aseres Mavos? So Yediyah as Yedana as Muzak Slichas Damos. I think that what he's being meramas to this Kariyim by Sekurev. The Messiah says Aseres special, God is closer to you, and that's something. How you would translate this? It's a Jewish legend. It's a Jewish tradition in the sense of. It's true. It's not philosophically true. Aristotle didn't know about it. If it was philosophically true, he would have known about it, right? No, I have to realize this. The drama, everything is philosophical. In other words, it's not michrich. I think when he says Kabbalah, there's always a level of knowledge in that. In other words, it's mizok, that's why. I think he doesn't have a problem continuing to zug azoi. I don't shall stop zugen azoi. So I get this mizok azoi. In other words, it's true. It's at least useful enough that we can saying it. But it's not like if you know me kippen the bunch can shim chaim machine nicht geschrieben as
Right.
also you have to remember if you do
in other words, it's not a thing that it's true. The thing is,
if you know the Arabic, I think you know that the context of this language, like Mephisim, it has a similar connotation, like someone would say. It's a Jewish legend that Yom Kippur, something like that. It's a language that they used to use, and I think I've seen in other places. In other words, no Chassid would write something like this. He would write it, but it would mean something else. It would mean, it's Mekibbel, it's Heilig. He said, but then when it says Mekibbel, it means it's not. This is Mekibbel, it's a Mefitzcha. But Tachlis, what he uses the Messiah same to prove that in this sense it is serious to him. In other words, it proves that Reshuna is not some separate thing. They tell us, we have this. Where did we get Sativa Surah Yomem, which includes Reshuna, right? So they tell us that Reshuna is basically a Yom Tshiva.
What's important to him here is this part.
Right. I'm just saying that the language is does it. Okay, so Tachlis, and then you would ask him why Yom Kippur, and for some reason the Rambam had to say that it has to do with this mechilas of Chet HaEgel. I don't understand why. So again, I would say, what would the Mekibbel say? Why is just some Mekibbel? Why? What do Mekibbel say? Why is Yom Kippur? They don't actually have a good answer for that question either, by the way. Again, Pesach, we could say the Aseres from Pesach. We do. They have the idea of otherwise, they have a technical Kabbalah reason. You could say they start saying B'riyas Ha'olam, and then so it takes Nasira side. But it's not. They don't have an historical connection. Maybe they say that's why there's a lichas sneas. Yeah, so it's a yearly thing. Okay, so let's say some. Well, I'll get to other ways of saying this, which will be more interesting. The Rambam thinks. The Rambam does. So this is different. I think it's very interesting. That's a very interesting thing. We do. The Aseres says the Yemei Tchilas B'Secho, and the Gemara seems to make a big deal out of it somehow. And what's Yom Kippur? What's Yom Kippur? Is Yom Kippur?
It's a very personal thing.
Why is it?
It's very interesting. To us, and that's always historical.
It's no?
It's very. I always feel like Yom Kippur is a very personal Yom Tov.
For us,
we celebrate some time, we do this, that, and the other thing. Peter was like, that I told you to get given up this and that. These get in a virus, teach either. It's about you. It's not about anybody else. It's about you yourself.
We try to make all the Yom Tov into this.
And the Chassidim like to make it very into this. Whatever. It's always
but Lamasa who give a cash, it's about you, then why is it then they have Tishrei? Why not on the Zion Cheshvan? See, that's why. Why is there no Pesach Kuten? Well, that's what can't machen. Yom Kippur Kuten makes sense, I think, no? Then Wednesday Yom Kippur Gutel, so I'm a rabbi. That's why it's Yom Kippur Gutel. And I would think that the Rambam giving an historical connection is trying to be mad this man. Now, du sollst nicht sagen, als du Stehrens, we'll see that people before him already said that the Stehrens, ich weiß es, dann muss machen sie es liegen, wegen dem Hintung des Tisches ist richtig. Na, gerade, it seems to be that's when, so therefore, in other words, it's a good reason, but it's not a 8-something reason. It's a happens to be just like Pesach. What is Pesach? In other words, we don't need this Kabbalah for Pesach to work. We only need Kabbalah for Pesach to work when we want Pesach to make, like you're saying, we want Pesach to be like Yom Kippur. We can't just celebrate. We can't say for what's next. Why the all these Chassidim can't celebrate as Maros from its time? So geschehen as lang, sag ich ja, it's geschehen as lang, so können sie nach Hals, mein Lila heute, whatever. It's so schwer. For some reason, they want it to be personal. They want it to be internal. So they say, but internally there's the Moichen. What was I saying? But Pipshat is schwer. The same thing. If Rishon would not have a reason, then it would sort of force us to make some kind of internal. This is heilig in some way. Well, like I'll show you the Rashba says this openly. The other Rishonim, they very clearly understood that there must be something special about the time. But what's being the Rishon is the Yemadin. It is. If we would have been out of Mitzrayim, Kislev would have been Kislev. Happens to be was then, so we understand. That's very so push it. The Rishon, if I was Aseres my Teshuva is Kriya Sekurev, it's a schwere Sach. It seems to point in the direction of Nish. In other words, of the opposite, like I sometimes say that Apikabule. Nish Pshat, as I'm sure people say, Nish Pshat as Pesach is Teshuva of Nissen, weil was Rosh Mitzrayim. The Rosh Mitzrayim was Teshuva of Nissen, right? Because there's some whatever, however I understand, there's something real in the time that makes it as man geilech, weiß was. And the same thing, and the Shun is the biggest raya for this kind of way of thinking. First step is Beich betisher is Rosh Hashanah. Say das is an Adam Leonim, das is Rosh Hashanah, Beich betisher. And Slicha Yom Kippur, let's say. And Rambam seems to be mafkir this when he says, when he tries to make an ikra out of this medrash, Gemura, that the Yom Shnitten by Lichas Shnias, he says, no, it's grad, weil dem was against Lechtek Dvorechel. Not even that, right? The Slechti was before. It's the Bisram. He says, Bisram al Aslicha, al Mechilas Chetam. So when they found out about it, right? It happened before. But Yemei Slechti Dvorechel, somewhere else. But the Slicha of Chetah, when is this geschehen? The Bachroinim Berutzen, no? It happened already much earlier. Or somewhere gets inzwischen, the 40 Tage, when it da, und ich weiß, spinklich. Was ist Yom Kippur geschehen? By the way, interestingly, no, again, the Mishnah in Tanis says that Yom Kippurim is Nitten bei Lichas Shnis. Doesn't say Yom Shanislech al Chetah Eigel. Is the Rambam that makes this? Oh, ich darf das checken jetzt. Haben Sie sich was ich frage? No, but even that doesn't say. Oh, I have to figure this out. Where did the Rambam get this idea that Yom Kippur is Slicha al Chetah Eigel? Where does it say? Da sagen wir kicken mit Techtes Tanes. Lass mal damit weiß. Lass mal kicken mit Techtes Tanes. Lass mal damit weiß. Ich hab's sich gefragt. That's the same Gemara in both of them. Das weiß doch, ja. So this is the Mishnah. We know the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't say anything about Slicha. It says, why is Yom Kippur such a big Yom Tov? You know, we need to buy Lichas Shnias, right? In other words, the Mishnah, I think the Mishnah generally understands that whatever Torah is given, it's a big thing. Like, I say, it's been in Lechem, ich meine. Lass mir dabei, ich sehe nicht. Ja, ein bisschen, and then the Gemara says like this, ein bisschen, ich bin nicht bei Slicha Mechila. Not then, stam, wie jeder Jahr, right? Weil Yom Shnit bei Lichas Achronis, this is, the Mishnah itself seems to say Mekpir, okay. Aber if the Chabush both, so that's the Gemara, and there's a whole, the Trashe, no, Yom Shnit bei Lichas Achronis. No, how do we know that? Zok Trashe. Should be Zayin Betames, I think there's the Gemara somewhere in Basra set. No, Rasha said this. Zok Trashe and Tanis. Should be Zayin Betames, Yud Moshe in a hard chile. Should be Lichas Bitches, Tochnes zu Eigel, von dann ist er Polish, will dem Modem, der Stern schon schmoine wie er, Boom ja und Fille. Boom ja im mit gewir schein. Ich should be Zayin Betames, kommt aus 80 days. 12 days from Tammuz, the Chusa, Shlesh David, Tish Del, Recht Veshem. Harash Mani Yem, without some Mishnah connected to the gets the Cheshm somehow works out. I have like Pai Shlam, Lalvian, the Kippur. What is Yem Nick for them Kippur, Diash, very interesting. Shamochal, the Nichmal Adwa, Shadi Belast, I'm kind of Sim Kippur, Kashmat, but this drama already heard it, right? So maybe the Ram took it from here. The Ram never quotes Rasha, but. Yeah, this one there? Someone. Where's this Rasha come from? Who told Rasha this? Seems like a medrash other episode, right? Kach Shamati. But it's not a so gets if Rasha says Kach Shamati, then it's not a Gemura, right? Gemura hat Rashi gekent. It's kind of some medrash. Yeah, the Mishnah Tag doesn't say Slichem Mechalisi, Rabbi Erlinger, which says that the Mishnah doesn't say. Geht's ja. Biam bringt noch Reis. Whatever, da kommt doch mal Schuss auf. Im Lischen Rasha Mashma, nothing. So, a Ketzer Amasa is, okay, it's durch Kiris, if it works out the exact cheshbon of the 80 days, it's not so a problem jetzt. Yeah, so this is like a Rasha Sarachagel. Very interesting. And the Rambam wants to claim that this is like the reason for Yom Kippur, because the Rasha thought that. So man. That's an idea, but it's nicht Chemisch, it's nicht Gemara. The Mishnah didn't seem to have this problem. Even the Mishnah talked about Yom Kippur being given count. Even the Medrash of the Mishnah talked about Lichas Shnias. If anything, it doesn't say in the Mishnah Lichas Shnias, right? Was steht in the Mishnah? Ich treffen the Mishnah. No, it doesn't say. Just this the Gemara. And even the Gemara just said the Slicha Mechila, and it doesn't say that Slicha Mechila betzad Lichas Shnias. Two things. This is why Slicha Mechila. You think that it's the same? Here. You think that the Slicha Mechila means the Gemara means that? That's how Rashi is explaining it?
I think so.
I don't think. I think that Rashi is just explaining how we know that that was a Lichas Achrayim. And then he's Grada saying that's why it's in Kippur. But he doesn't say that that's a Slicha Mechila. The Slicha Mechila, that is from the Slicha Mechila, we know. Shtat Mechimish. It's in Tzad Yom Kippur, nicht mit Tzad. The Rambam wants, Bekitze, what it seems to me is, again, that the Rambam wants to, I don't know, this is just proving to me that the Rambam is adding something here. Can't do a makar. Everything has usually a makar, but the Rambam is changing it. Nicht pshat. Efshetak, I think them is in nicht pshat as du Slicha Mechila and Efshevaket. Maybe that's why we could say, again, we could have thought the other way. That's why that was, and also the Slicha Mechila wasn't really then, so it's not real. It's only, that was the day that we found out that she, we could say something like the Rambam, even more we could say. Since the Rambam Slicha Mechila are not real anyways, it's just about making people believe that Shiva works, right? Because we want, otherwise people will stay bad. So you have to tell them that Taibshat Moichels on, which is probably true in some sense, but Nishk Pshita, right? So therefore, when was the first time we did this? On the first Yom Kippur, because they found out, oh, ich mach chet ha'egel, but we can sibeleben, we can werden besser. And since then, we remember we signed that day by making it Yom Kippur, and 10 days before we already make it a Shashuna. So, in other words, the Seis Machiva seems to, I would say, changes this into something that God does, because God doesn't take 10 days to do anything, but we need 10 days to do Chiva, right? Fash Pramasim, to be Marbe Tzedukah, whatever the Rambam says over there. And that's why we have, that's why we have Yom Kippur be Rishuna in the first day Tisha, and Yom Kippur be 10th day of Tisha. He ignores the Mushal for Rishuna. He doesn't say that because they have Tchilas Masechel. He just says it's 10 days before Yom Kippur. It seems to be he's very much promoting the Chiva over everything else, and Chiva somehow connects with Chiva from the first time, so we have an historical connection. Why pink then? But Lamasa, in other words, and more generally, why we need every year? For every year, we would say, like he said in Pairik Lamed Fuv, whatever it was, Lamed High. And like he seems, because the Rav mentions, and Zindig, and like a side of the man, similar to like the Chatzizaki Chatzichayev connection that I made. So Adkan, I think that's Adkan Divrei Rambam. There's one more Rambam that we have to, again, okay, I'm going to skip the part about the din, but in Masechet Rishon, the Rambam says that the din, the Rishon is Nishkip Shita, but that's just to connect that. And Perish Mishnah is Rishon, ja, Chlevazen, wie gehe ich das wasen? So but I don't know why, I have to look through this and make it organized. Ich sage das Rishon, just have to show this to you, and then, willst du schon gehen?
Well, yeah.
A second. I'm gonna have to make a second or so. Perish Mishnah sagt es schon, lass mal sehen, sie können es treffen. Here. Alatviya, the Rambam. Yeah, and the second Mishnah, Masherbe, explained, Vatargum, explained what he meant, B'nai Meroin, if you don't understand, Klemish Machash B'nai Udam, Durus Lebrias and Machl Hosechem is Lizam Shaman 7 Udam, so the Rambam, this is not a technical thing, because it only says in the Gemara, Mobus V'chaim, and the Rambam added that it means everything else, right? What? Pshat Losh is a Burik Mushtara, there's nothing to explain here. So again, what's so hard to understand? So there's this I wrote here. So basically all the media and all the people understood, because was heißt Rashuna Taibste dann ganz unisch, that's the thing that they understood, that's not Kipshito. Bchalashkocha has something great in this way, but that's how there's someone that says that it means because of the Gemura and the Skir of Achas, but it's connected, it's the same kind of problem. The Mekitze, the Rambam sagt, this is just his very short way of saying, don't take this literally. It's du Asad, what it really means, right? Pshat, Papi Pshat versteist, da Eibest ist dann, aber es ist nicht richtig, es ist nicht the Sod. What is the Sod? It doesn't say, so, and he never says, as far as I can tell. This is everything we know from what he says, but if you read what the Rambam says about Ashgocha, and very openly, and what he says about Chavalinish, and what, so you start to understand what he probably thinks about this.
It's like, yeah, Chigo was very big.
Okay, so yeah.